Have you ever had one of those moments where you suddenly realize you've just been going through the motions?
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
Right. Like, you know the exact feeling. You're driving home from work, you pull into your driveway, turn off the ignition, and you have, like, absolutely zero memory of the last 5 miles.
Yeah, highway hypnosis.
Yeah.
Your brain just entirely checks out.
Exactly. Or, you're sitting in a meeting, physically nodding along to whatever's being said, but your brain is essentially running on a screensaver mode.
Just completely blank.
Yeah. You are living on autopilot. You're just reacting to the stimuli around you out of sheer habit rather than moving through your day with any sort of actual deliberate intention.
Which is, an incredibly common, almost default state of being for modern adults.
Mm-hmm.
We get locked into these stagnant reflexes just to survive the sheer volume of tasks we have to get through every single day.
We stop acting and we start reacting.
Precisely. We just react.
And that deeply unsettling realization, that feeling of being trapped in a stagnant reflex, that's our starting line today. We are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating source.
Yeah, this one is genuinely unique.
It really is. It's a philosophical narrative text called The Conscious River, Refinement and Originality. And specifically, we're unpacking a section of the text, parts 15 through 18, to understand what the author calls the evolution of consciousness.
Which sounds heavy, but it's actually incredibly practical.
Exactly. The whole mission of this deep dive is to map out how we actually transition from being like a stagnant, thoughtless puddle of reflexes into a purposeful, intentional flow.
And what's fascinating here is the structure the author uses to convey these concepts. Because we aren't just reading a dry academic treatise.
Thank goodness.
Right. The text is actually framed as a dynamic narrative dialogue between 3 specific characters. You have the nephew, who acts as the seeker.
He's basically the stand-in for us, right?
Yep. Exactly. He represents the reader, someone trying to wake up from that exact autopilot state you just described. And he's guided by 2 mentors who come from vastly different worldviews.
Yeah, so you have the uncle who brings this deep, ancient spiritual wisdom to the table. He speaks entirely in metaphors of nature and soul.
And then you have Roger.
Good old Roger.
Right. Roger brings a highly technical systems engineering perspective to the exact same problems.
Which is such a wild combination.
It is. It creates this brilliant tension. I mean, you wouldn't expect software development theory to sit comfortably next to spiritual philosophy.
No, not at all.
But the interplay between Roger and the uncle really grounds the text. It makes it clear that we are dealing with a practical, contemplative guide.
Right. This isn't about like retreating to a monastery on a mountain.
No, it's about finding universal connection and spiritual accountability right here in the noisy, everyday world.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because the first hurdle is simply waking up. If I'm currently driving those 5 miles with no memory of it, how do I snap out of that stagnant reflex?
Well, according to the text, it all starts with observation.
Just looking around.
Yes, but a very specific kind of observation. So in the narrative, the nephew and his mentors are looking at the flight of an eagle.
Okay.
And watching this eagle becomes the actual catalyst that shifts the nephew from mechanical reaction to deliberate awareness.
Wait, just watching a bird fly does that?
It does, but the mechanism behind this shift is vital. The text argues that the physical world acts as a mirror, but, only if you know how to look into it.
Okay, explain that.
When the nephew watches the eagle, he isn't just looking at a bird flying. He is observing the deliberate, majestic aerodynamics, the pure intention in its glide.
Ah, I see.
The eagle's entirely present. Recognizing that level of complex, deliberate design in nature holds a mirror up to the observer.
It forces a contrast.
Exactly. It forces a jarring psychological contrast. If a bird is navigating the wind with that much focused intention, why am I navigating my human life like a mindless machine?
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. It's the contrast that jolts you awake.
Yeah, it really is.
The text notes that landscapes and animals aren't just like background scenery. They can be read like a language reflecting divine attributes of beauty, power, and purpose.
That phrase, read like a language, is key here.
It reminds me of the process of learning to read. Like, think about a toddler looking at a picture book.
Right. They just see shapes?
Exactly. At first, they just see random, meaningless squiggles on a page. That's what it's like when we look at nature and just see stuff. Like, a tree is just wood, an eagle is just a bird.
It's just background noise.
Right. But once you learn the language, you realize those squiggles are actually words, and those words build a profound narrative. Once you learn how to read the intention in the world, you just can't unsee it.
You realize you're standing in the middle of a story.
Exactly. So how do we actually make that shift, though? Does the text suggest it's just about paying closer attention, or is there like a deeper shift in mindset required?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture the text is painting, learning to read that language is what the uncle calls entering the fertile cycle of growth.
Fertile cycle.
Okay. Yeah, because once you see the story, you are implicated in it. Recognizing this language immediately demands a deeper spiritual accountability.
So it's not a passive thing anymore.
Not at all. It's no longer a passive experience. When you realize the world is imbued with meaning and deliberate design, you basically lose your excuse to live on the surface.
You can't justify the screensaver mode anymore.
Exactly. You have to engage with the depth of the world, which inevitably forces you to engage with the hidden depths of yourself.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a little daunting.
Yeah, it definitely takes a turn.
Because realizing you need to wake up is one thing, but actually internalizing that evolution, moving your life from that stagnant puddle to a conscious, moving river, it's not portrayed as a gentle awakening at all.
No, it is not.
The text relies on two really intense metaphors, the seed and the steel, to argue that this requires a painful breaking down of old structures.
Yeah, growth is so frequently romanticized today. We think of it as simply adding new, positive habits to your routine. Like, I'm going to start drinking more water and meditating.
Right, the very aesthetic, gentle, self-care version of growth.
Exactly. But the text aggressively rejects that. Transformation fundamentally requires dismantling what is already there.
So let's talk about the seed metaphor first.
Right. So the nephew first brings up the metaphor of the seed. A seed sits buried in the soil, entirely unseen, just waiting in the darkness.
Safe and sound.
Safe, yes. But to actually grow, quote, at the appointed time, it has to violently break its own protective shell to push upward through the dirt toward the light.
The nephew actually refers to this as a form of resurrection, right?
Right. He does.
Because the old version of the seed essentially has to die for the plant to live. And the uncle maps this directly onto our psychology.
How so?
He points out that we all have inner shells. They are our fears, our comfortable daily habits, and my personal favorite, our ready-made answers.
Oh, the ready-made answers. That one hits hard.
It really does. Those are the cliches we throw out at dinner parties so we don't have to think deeply. They're the stagnant reflexes forming a hard protective armor around our consciousness.
And if we refuse to shatter that armor, we remain safe. We stay comfortably buried in the dark, but we never meet the sky. We never actually live.
Wow.
And then the text pushes this even further with the second metaphor, which is the rusted steel.
Right. The nephew talks about iron that has completely lost its utility because it's covered in thick corrosion.
It's useless.
Yeah. And if you want to make that iron strong and useful again, you can't just take a rag and polish it. You have to literally shove it into a blazing fire and strike it repeatedly on an anvil.
Which the uncle calls our inner rust. Over the years, through trauma, laziness, or just simple attrition, our minds and spirits gather rust. We lose our sharpness.
It's unavoidable, really.
It is. And the text asserts that without confronting this inner rust, without willingly submitting to the fire and the hammering of self-examination and discipline, we cannot shine.
Okay, and this is where Roger chimes in. And his interjection here is arguably the most helpful part of the entire narrative for me.
Oh, I totally agree.
He takes this ancient poetic imagery of forges and seeds and applies a systems engineering framework to it. He calls this painful process refactoring.
It is such a brilliant translation of the concept.
Break that down for us. What does refactoring mean in this context?
So in software development, code naturally degrades over time. As a program grows, developers add quick patches, they use workarounds, the logic just gets messy.
It gets bloated.
Exactly. In the industry, this is called technical debt. The software still technically runs, but it's sluggish and it's prone to crashing.
Kind of like a person on autopilot.
Exactly like a person on autopilot. So refactoring is the deliberate, painstaking process of tearing that underlying code apart line by line and restructuring it to be clean and efficient without changing its external behavior.
Human technical debt. That is exactly what a stagnant reflex is.
Precisely. Roger argues that humans gather rust, just like code gathers technical debt. Cleaning it out is agonizing.
Because you have to look at it.
Right. You have to confront all the messy workarounds you built into your own personality. But the newly refactored version of the system, meaning the human mind, is infinitely more resilient.
Okay, I have to push back here on behalf of anyone listening who is currently just exhausted by the sheer demands of their daily life.
Fair enough.
Does this growth always have to hurt? Let me throw an analogy at you. Think about renovating a house.
Okay.
You decide you want a beautiful, modern shower. You want the upgraded plumbing. But you cannot install new pipes without taking a sledgehammer and tearing open the drywall.
You have to make a mess.
Exactly. The destruction of the living room is a non-negotiable prerequisite for the improvement of the house. Is the text saying there is absolutely no way to just, quietly upgrade our mental software in the background while we sleep?
The text is unequivocal on this.
Yeah.
You have to tear open the drywall.
Ugh, really? No shortcuts.
No shortcuts. Hardship is the actual mechanism of change. The uncle summarizes this by stating that hardship either breaks a person entirely or it matures them.
There's no neutral outcome.
Exactly. A conscious river is a person who has trained themselves to interpret difficulty. The fire, the hammering, the torn drywall, not as random punishments from an angry universe, but as the necessary refactoring of their inner rust.
So it's a massive cognitive reframe. We are essentially changing our fundamental relationship to pain.
It's exactly it.
Okay, let's explore the other side of that process. Let's say we endure the hammering. We tear down the drywall, we break out of our comfortable shells, and we survive the refactoring.
We made it through.
Right. What is the actual result? Do we just become detached, enlightened monks floating above society?
Not at all. And that leads directly into the nephew's essay, which is titled Richly Original.
I love that title.
It's great. This is where the text transitions from internal psychology to external application. The nephew attempts to articulate what a newly refactored conscious life actually looks like in practice.
Right.
And he argues that a person who has done this work will naturally produce output, whether that's art, business, or simply how they raise their family, that carries the, quote, fragrance of originality.
But there is a massive caveat attached to this idea of originality, and it completely stopped me in my tracks when I read it.
The part about ego.
Yes. The nephew insists that while you should be original, your growth must happen without egoism, without tribal arrogance, and it should never feel alien to the society in which you live.
Which is such a countercultural idea. It raises an important question about how modern culture defines uniqueness.
Definitely. We're often taught that originality requires, burning down all conventions.
Being a complete rebel.
Right. Alienating ourselves from the past just to prove how different we are.
But the uncle explicitly rejects this. His definition of originality is opening new paths while remaining faithful to essence.
Faithful to essence. To me, that sounds exactly like a master jazz musician.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Think about it. If you go to a club and watch a brilliant jazz pianist improvise, the music sounds completely unprecedented. It's wild, it's new, it's highly original.
Feels like magic.
But if you actually talk to that musician, they will tell you that to earn the right to improvise like that, they had to spend thousands of hours mastering the underlying scales.
Studying the history of the genre.
Right. Internalizing the fundamental rules of harmony. You have to master the absolute essence of the song before you can break the rules and open new paths.
You can't skip the foundation.
Exactly. True originality requires a bedrock foundation. You can't just smash your fists on the piano keys and call it jazz.
That captures the uncle's point perfectly. Smashing the keys is difference merely for the sake of difference. It's ego.
True. Refined originality is an internal flow that extends your shared humanity in a new direction. Roger actually adds to this, saying that it is through this internal, authentic flow that constant renewal happens, rather than, forced, chaotic rebellion.
Which brings us to the final evolution of the metaphor. Because the jazz musician doesn't play to an empty room, and a river doesn't flow in a vacuum.
Right, a river flows through a landscape.
Exactly. This conscious journey isn't a solo endeavor. Our newly refactored, richly original selves eventually have to step out the front door and interact with the broader society.
And society is messy.
Very messy.
The text shifts focus to the collective flow, arguing that societies, much like individuals, must actively rid themselves of superiority and inferiority complexes.
So taking that ego death to a societal level.
Yes. And diversity isn't portrayed as some political talking point or a hurdle to overcome. The text positions it as a fundamental universal trait.
Right.
The nephew points out the differences exist specifically so we can recognize, preserve, and continue our shared humanity. He explicitly states we do not need corruption or conflict to drive progress. What humanity actually requires is restoration, communication, encounter, and growth.
That's beautiful.
It really is. And this is where the river metaphor hits its absolute peak for me. The text describes how every river eventually flows through incredibly varied terrains.
It carves through lush valleys.
It drags through arid deserts. It passes orchards and cities on its way to the sea. The environments constantly change, but the mandate for the river remains the exact same. Quote, "Leave greenery behind, like Kidir, wherever one passes."
We should probably clarify that reference for context.
Yes, please do.
Kidir is a figure in various ancient traditions who is deeply associated with greenness, esoteric wisdom, and the preservation of life. He's essentially a symbol of nourishment.
So let's ground that in a modern, everyday scenario to see how it actually works.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you are the river, and your terrain today is a highly stressful corporate meeting, followed by a painfully slow line at the grocery store with a really rude cashier. Oh, that sounds like a horrible day.
Right, that is your arid desert. But you have a choice. You can crash into those situations with your ego, causing a flood of anxiety and conflict.
Just adding to the misery.
Exactly. Or you can act like Kidir. You can leave greenery behind. You actively de-escalate the tension in the meeting. You offer a moment of genuine grace to the exhausted cashier. You leave the environment slightly more alive, slightly more nourished than it was before you flowed through it.
It's about utility to others, not just self-actualization. And the text gives us a very pragmatic metric for navigating this.
What's that?
It says our goal is to know ourselves, maintain our dignity, and sustain the journey with, quote, as few collisions as possible.
As few collisions as possible. I deeply, deeply appreciate the realism of that phrase.
It's very forgiving, isn't it?
It is. It acknowledges that you are a river flowing through a crowded, jagged world. Bumps are inevitable. You are going to scrape against rocks. You'll hit other currents. You'll face misunderstandings with other people.
You're not perfect. Right. But a refined consciousness, someone who has done the grueling work of refactoring their inner rust, doesn't let the collision define the journey. You minimize the damage, you absorb the shock, and you return your focus entirely to leaving greenery in your wake.
Which culminates in the uncle's most vital piece of wisdom. He tells the nephew, universal values and change must walk side by side.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Think about the physical anatomy of a river. The water represents change, the constant flowing forward motion of our originality and growth.
Makes sense.
But the riverbanks represent universal values, our shared humanity, our dignity, our fidelity to essence.
The boundaries.
Exactly. If you only have water with no banks to guide it, you just have a destructive, chaotic flood. But if you only have banks with no flowing water, you just have a dry, stagnant ditch.
Wow. You need the tension between the two to create a conscious river.
And that realization is the ultimate goal of true reflection. The uncle points out the incredible arc of their conversation. They began by simply observing the aerodynamic glide of an eagle in the sky.
Just watching a bird.
Right. And through the process of reflection, they arrived at the deepest necessities of shared human dignity. That is the true meaning of the text. Disparate pieces meeting within one unified stream of meaning.
So what does this all mean for you listening today? Let's trace the map we've just pulled from the conscious river. It begins with a stark choice. The choice to wake up from our screensaver mode, to closely observe the world around us, and to allow the deliberate design of nature to mirror our own lack of intention.
And from there, it requires stepping into the fire. We have to endure the painful refactoring of our human technical debt.
The inner rust.
Yes. We must allow the hammering to break our protective shells of fear and those ready-made answers so the seed can finally push through the dirt.
And if we survive that drywall-tearing renovation, we discover our true originality. Not by smashing the piano keys in an act of rebellion, but by mastering the scales of our shared humanity and opening new paths while staying faithful to our essence.
Ultimately, we become a conscious river, choosing to nourish the deserts and valleys we flow through, minimizing our collisions and leaving vital greenery in our wake.
It is a profound, albeit, very demanding blueprint for an intentional existence.
It really requires an immense amount of work.
It does. And because of that, we want to leave you with a final, lingering question to mull over as you navigate the rest of your day. We spent this time talking about your personal journey, your refactoring, your riverbanks, your flow.
But society is a landscape filled with billions of other currents.
Exactly. So here's the question. What happens when you, as a conscious river, inevitably collide with someone else who has also done the deep work, who has also found their profound originality, but whose universal values, their riverbanks, are angled in a completely different direction than yours?
That's the real test.
It is.
Yeah.
How do you navigate the rapids of two conflicting, fiercely authentic originalities without causing a flood?